This is the third lecture on JavaFX user interaction, and I'm going to show some code demonstration of a game that has multiple panes where we swap out the panes, and I'm showing that because a lot of students seem to like to do that in their projects. So first of all, we're moving into actual transitions. JavaFX, they call them transitions. I think of them as animations. There's many types. We'll only focus on 3, and I'm really only going to do a demo of the last one. In the live lectures, I did demos of all of them. So there's the fade transition. You pick a GUI element. It literally fades in and out, fades in and out. And there are all kinds of settings you can put on that particular transition. How many times does it fade in and out? Does it fade all the way out or part way out? Does it go back and forth? Does it do it forever, just a few times? The second is a path transition, where you define a path and then you attach a GUI element to the path and it will travel along the path. And again, all kinds of settings for that. How long does it take? Does it go back and forth? Does it do it more than once? Does it do it all the time? And the one that I'm going to demonstrate is called a timeline. The timeline, basically, you can think of as a loop, and it runs through every, you determine the time. I think I use 50 milliseconds. You can almost think of a timeline like each individual element of a timeline as a single frame in a movie. You've seen the old movies with frame by frame by frame. And as you run it through the projector, you get motion. So the timeline animation is the one we'll demonstrate. And the thing that I used to demonstrate is the beginnings of a game that I was making. I never finished it, called Pirates. It's based on an old late 1970s game called Rip-Off, where you have a ship and there's fuel cells and enemies come in and try to steal the fuel cells, and your job is to protect them. I only have the user-controlled ship implemented so far. So as we play this thing, there it is, very simple. And I can move my ship around, speed it up, and slow it down. But notice I went from a splash pane, this introductory pane, to another one where I actually play, and I wanted to talk about all of that stuff. So if you were to develop this thing, you ask yourself, what objects would I need? How do I create this thing? What's the view? What's the model? What's the controller? And the solution you might come up with, well, let's see, we have a player ship and an enemy ship. We probably should have a generic ship, and then we can extend the generic ship to the player, extend the generic ship to the aliens or the enemies. That's probably a good idea. Then we probably need, and then of course we're going to need a view. So this is the view that you're looking at, and that's going to be just basically the circle that represents the ship. Remember, the actual ship is the model of the ship, the class that contains the ship data, and then the circle that you see is just the view of the ship. And then some kind of a controller, and as before, the controller and the pane are pretty closely tied. I do have a separate game controller, a class for that, and then I put that inside of a pane. If I look at my UML diagram for that, this is my design. I have a generic ship, I extend that to the player ship, and I extend that to the alien ship. Right now, and I would have multiple alien ship classes. Right now I only have the player ship implemented, so the game manager only makes one player ship right now. Eventually I'll have the alien ship, and the game manager will make a alien ship also. As far as the GUI goes, I have the main GUI, and then I have 2 panes. I have the splash pane, which is the one that has the Jolly Roger flag and the button that says let's continue, and then I have the actual pane that you play in. The pane that you play in contains the game manager. It makes an object of the game manager class, and that way I have full communication from the GUI down to the model. You click, or events happen here in the GUI in this pane, and that will initiate requests from the game manager to make things happen, like moving the ship around or turning the ship or speeding the ship up and down. So that will tell the game manager to make things happen. And then when the ship moves, the top pane can ask the game manager, hey, where's that ship now? I need to move my circle. So two things are going on here. One is when we begin the game that we can swap these panes out. How do we do that? Well, you saw that I have a button in this pane, right? There's a button. Let's play. And that button, when you click it, will bring the other pane in. There it is. The problem is this splash pane doesn't know anything about this top pane. So the splash pane needs to figure out how to convert over to the splash pane, but it doesn't know anything about it. How do you handle that? Well, who knows about both the panes? The main GUI does. Pirate's main GUI class knows about both of those panes. So as you'll see in the code, what I do is I create the button actually at that top level. I create the button in the Pirate's main GUI, and then when I make the splash pane, I hand that button down to the splash pane. And that button's behavior is all defined up here at Pirate's main GUI. So when the button says, hey, swap out these panes, that can happen at the main GUI level. And because the button was created at the main GUI level, it knows everything about the main GUI, and we can construct the method that makes that swapping out happen. Once you get into the top pane, now why did I make a separate pane for that? Why a separate class? Again, usually the pane that you're actually doing your work in terms of what the user sees and what the user uses, usually that's a fairly complicated thing. And so in order to keep all the details and dirt and clutter out of the top level code, just make your own pane. Pirate's top pane extends pane. And then you can modify that generic pane to suit the needs of your project. One of the modifications is to include a game manager. The other one is about doing responding to key events, so that when I click the up arrow, the ship speeds up. When I click the right arrow, down arrow, the ship slows down. So if we actually look at the code for this, there's my code, and here's my top level code. Not much to it. I tried not to do too much work at the top level. I had to do some work because remember I had to create that button. So I do create a button, and then I tie that button to transition to play pane method. Now how did I do these things? Remember we talked about a border pane last lesson, last week. And one easy way to swap these panes around, in the border pane contains different sections, and you can put panes inside each section. So what I do with the border pane is I put the splash pane in the center of the border pane. Then when I want to transition to play pane, all I do is set the Pirate's play pane as the center of that border pane. So what do? I create a border pane, I create a splash pane, I create the Pirate's pane. Top level knows about both of those. I create a button. Inside the button, I set up the transition to play pane. We'll talk about that method right now. And what does that thing do? Transition to play pane. All I do is the top pane set center becomes the play pane. That's it. And then I say send the focus to the play pane. In other words, the focus is what the computer is listening to, if you will. So while I'm doing my, I'm using my arrow controls. So when I do up, down, left, right arrows, the pane can actually recognize that I'm doing that. Okay, so I create the button. Transition to play pane method is tied to the button action. Inside the splash pane then, I give it that button, set continue to play. Oh, okay. So if you look inside the splash pane, it has two things, an image and a button. The button is an attribute. That way I can set it, and sure enough, I set continue to play pane. In other words, this is where the top level pane is handing me that button that it created. And then all I have to do is, position it and then add it to the pane. Same trick with the image. I position it and add it to the pane, and that's it. That's the whole thing. So I create the splash pane, and I set the image, and I set the button. Now the button again was handed down from this top level down to that pane. And because that button was created at this level, that button can have the action where it knows how to swap out the splash pane. Top pane is my border pane. So initially I set center splash pane. So initially when we run the code, you see the Jolly Roger and the button. And then as soon as I click the button, we're going to swap that to top pane, set center, play pane. So now you're going to see the plane that you're actually playing the game in. So this follows the same kind of steps that I keep telling you that I recommend. I create my nodes being the button in the splash pane and the top pane and the play pane. So I create those nodes, and then I take the button and I put it in the splash pane. And I take the splash pane and I put it in the top pane, and then I put the top pane in the scene. You can see why I say you should draw these things out ahead of time. If you try to keep it all straight in your head without thinking about it first and actually drawing it out, it's going to get confusing. Once I have the top pane, right, so I build the button, put the button in the splash pane, put the splash pane in the top pane, put the top pane in the scene, put the scene in the stage, and then show. Once the button is clicked, we go to the play pane, and that play pane, it's mostly just dirt and gunk and clutter that has to do with setting up the visualization. But there is one thing in here that's special. I should say two things. The first thing is, just setting all this stuff up. And again, I did it inside of methods. So I create a game manager, and then I call the game manager, hey, initialize the game. Now, initialize all ships. Right now there's only one ship, but eventually I would have multiple ships. Initialize the view. Oh, that's the view on the play pane. Then I add the ship to the pane, I add the direction indicator to the pane. If you notice, that little circle has a line on it for a direction indicator. Those are two separate things. And then I create the game animation. Oh, what's the game animation? That's where I put my timeline in. So I build a timeline called animation. That's its name. And the way you build a timeline is you say new timeline and you new keyframe. And the keyframe is, what are you going to do? It has two parts to it. What are you going to do every cycle, and how long is the cycle? The cycle is 50 milliseconds, so we're going to get 50 times 20 is 1,000, so we're going to get 20 updates a second. This is effectively a movie at 20 frames a second. And what do I do every 50 milliseconds? I move all ships. How long do I do it for? I do it forever. And then I hit play. So play is saying start the animation. The other thing I need to do is have the user controls to control the ship. So these are key presses, and I do this dot set on key press. I don't know if I need to do this. By the way, I have a note to myself here, right? Set on key pressed. This just means this class. Set on key pressed. Oh, what do I need to do? Same trick. E, and then arrow, and then I do code. And remember, you can do as much code as you want after that arrow. So where is it? Oh, there it is. There it is. Has to be inside the parentheses. So there it is. So I do all that code. That's kind of lousy. I should have done that as a method. I should have separated that as a method. And basically all I'm doing is checking to see if I have left, right, up, down, and then I either turn the ship to the left or the right, or speed it up or slow it down. Again, I'm going through this quickly because you can look at the code yourself. Okay, this setup, I recommend something like this for your projects is just fine. I'll have another example up. I won't give a lecture on it, I don't think, but I'll have another example up where you have panes that are side by side at the same time and how they interact with each other. And it's the same trick. You have to do all the building up at the high level so that if you click a button in this pane, something happens in that pane. Well, those two panes don't know about each other, so you have to put it at the higher level. Okay, that's it for this section. Look through the code. I recommend that you build your own from scratch, build little toy programs just to see if you can do some stuff. Take the code that I have and modify it and play with it. And this is the part people like because you get real interaction.